Welcome to the Growth Now movement. I'm your host, Justin Shank. I'm an entrepreneur, speaker, and podcaster who years ago decided to go on a journey on how to grow in all areas of my life. What I found out was it's really a matter of focusing on the 4 pillars of life: business, relationships, spirituality, and wellness. And that's what we do here. We explore how to continuously grow in those areas, all while having a ton of fun doing it. I'm really excited you're on this journey with me. Now let's get to this week's episode. This week, I sit down with Mark Dreger. Mark is a brand strategist, podcast host, and founder of a growth agency. His goal is to help those of us who have something to prove show the world and ourselves that we have what it takes to make it happen. I absolutely love this conversation. I'm just going to get right to it, guys, because we dive into some deep topics. We have some great conversation about life, about putting yourself out there, about pursuing your passions, and I think everybody needs to hear this chat that I have with Mark, so make sure you check it out. Now, before we get there, I want to remind you guys that Growth Now Summit Live is right around the corner, so grab your tickets now, growthnowsummit.com. Tickets are on sale. We have about 60 left for in-person, and we just opened up virtual. So if you're listening to this in the UK, if you're listening to this in Japan, if you're listening to this in South Africa, grab your tickets now because you now have live virtual access. growthnowsummit.com. Cannot wait to see you there. And now, without further ado, let's get to the episode with Mark Dreger. Mark, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, dude, I'm excited. Look, I was recently on your show. I loved the conversation, and I know that we're going to get into some amazing topics here during this conversation. I'm going to let you do a lot of the talking because I'll let my audience know I'm battling the COVID. By the way, this comes out on Tuesday. We're chatting on Friday. I'm battling the COVID, and I'm going to mute myself and cough a lot. But Mark, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself to my audience, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm Mark Dreger. When I was young, when I was 23 years old, back in 2005, I started a creative production company. I thought that would be my life. I thought that would be my life work. And then, 10 years, 12 years in, I realized that I wasn't really happy with my business. Multi-million-dollar business, great, looks good on the outside, but I wasn't having fun. The projects, shooting national commercial spots, we have having clients. We have airline clients who are like flying us down to the Caribbean and giving us like private suites. And there's a day where I walk into a hangar at an international airport, and there's a 737 sitting there just for us for the day, so we could shoot stuff with it. Wow. And so like these moments of like really cool things where you stop for a moment and you go, is this what I'm doing? Is this my life? And yet stressed out, not happy, getting bored, just whatever. And then there becomes this time where I realize that I get paid to make successful people very slightly more successful. And it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to be in that business, right? It's not great to dedicate your life and the hours and the effort and put everything on the line to do something that again, we're working with huge companies. Does our project make or break the stock? No. Does it improve year end? No. Does it provide ROI? No. Does it help anyone? No. Does it actually break through? No. So I've spent the last few years figuring all of that stuff out. And today, you said you were on my podcast. What I found out is I love hosting. I love asking questions. I love connecting with people. And so today I'm a host of a podcast. I host conversations live on stage with people, and I still own that creative agency. But we've managed to shift it and fix it and just get so much better.
Dude, I love that. And because I'm a huge studier of this idea of reaching your goals and having what society says is successful on a piece of paper. And then all of a sudden people go, wait, this isn't what it's supposed to be. This isn't all, gravy. This isn't all the greatest thing in the world. What was your tipping point? What was the realization? Was there a moment where you went, this is no longer what I want to do. This is no longer feeding my soul. But what was there something that happened? What was it?
Yeah, there were 15 of them spread out over many, many years because I wish I would have the clarity in the moment. But I heard something from Gary Vee a few years ago, and it perfectly describes the situation I was in. And what he was saying, he was relating it to relationships. So there's always a time where you finally decide to break up with someone. Or there's always a time where you finally decide to fire someone on your team, or when you decide to give something up. But that is usually months or years after in your heart you actually knew the truth. And so it's what I've learned actually through all of this is it's all a game of being able to close the gap between when your heart tells you it's over and when you actually pull the trigger. But so the moment for me really came just last April. COVID hit as we know it did, and you and I were talking before we hit record in terms of what you've been working through. But COVID hit, and I flourished. April of 2020 was the happiest time of my life. Now, why? Why was that? Well, because my clients all went on pause, and it's like, oh, good, I don't have to worry about that stress anymore. I could stay home. I could focus on the things I wanted to focus on. And I had coverage. I had a reason and excuse to pull myself out of the business, and no one would blame me for doing so. And right. I loved it. And then we get to, May, June, July, and the world comes back to normal, and my anxiety goes up, my stress goes up, panic attacks come back. Suddenly the freedom I have, I've lost. Suddenly the clients that I was worried about, I now have to face and work with and deal with. And it hit me. It's like, what's going on here? Why is it when I was free, I was happy, and now I'm quote unquote back to normal, I am so unhappy again? And so that was a big thing for me, but it took me a full year to be able to finally say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And the hard thing was, we've just celebrated our 15th anniversary at my agency, Phantom Media. And so I'd spent 14 years of my life building this thing. And for me to say, I don't want to do it anymore. Now, I didn't realize, it then took me from April to September to realize, oh, I can still do this. I can just fix it. I can blow it up, like really completely blow it up. And we could rebuild it, and we could shift it. We could change it. We could do all of those things. But in April, it was like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't care what it costs me. I have to get myself out. And so that was really the biggest shift for me last April.
So do you feel like when somebody's going through life that they need that shake your soul moment, or can it happen before you reap the rewards of your hard work? Right? Like, because I've had these conversations with high achievers, and they make the millions, and they do all the cool stuff, and they have the neat friends, and they have the cool experiences. And then all of a sudden they have something that happens, and then they go, oh no, wait, I don't need all of this. Is there a way, do you think, and you might not know, but is there a way, do you think, that somebody can discover that before having to go get the things that society says is the success, et cetera? Does that make sense?
It totally does. And the answer is yes and no. So Jim Carrey has this famous line where he says, I wish everyone could be a millionaire so they'd realize it's not important. And then I always respond with, I'd like to be a millionaire to learn that lesson. Right? Like it's nice. It's nice to have the money to learn that lesson. If you're scraping to get by, if you're struggling to get by, if you're running out of cash, if you're just struggling, it doesn't matter what Jim Carrey says.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it really doesn't. So that's why it's a no. But here's why it might be a yes. When I was realizing that this thing that I had spent 14 years building and growing and working towards and messing up and making mistakes in and all of that stuff, the reason why I came to this decision in April is because I was working through the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bonnie Ware. And in the book, she lays out 5 regrets. She's an end-of-life worker. She helped families deal with, if people don't know the book, she helped families. She cared for elderly or sick people who were reaching the end of the life. As a nurse, she would be by the bedside for the weeks or the months leading up to someone's passing, and she noticed that everyone seemed to have these same 5 regrets. And so I'm reading this book, and I'm going, do I want to hit the end of my life? Hopefully a long time from now, but do I want to hit the end of my life and have these regrets? I've heard thought leaders, I've heard speakers, I've had friends tell me, you don't want to die with regrets, but that didn't mean anything to me until I actually heard the 5 regrets. And I was like, oh, regrets like, I wish I had the courage to be myself. I wish I didn't work so much. I wish I didn't live for other people's expectations but my own. Like, some things that was like, oh, those are actual defined regrets. And I could see that I was on a path to win all 5 out of 5, right? Like, I'm going to get to the end of my life and I'm going to be like, winner, I have all 5 of these regrets. And so this is why it's possibly a yes, because I made the decision in that moment that I don't know if these regrets are true or not. Just because we all have them doesn't mean it's actually true. But let's assume that these are true, that I will hit the end of my life and I will have these regrets, and I don't want to live that life. So can I proactively live a life where I will not allow myself to have them? So back to your question about money and the trappings of life. If you believe you will hit a point where you are successful and you get all of these things, and you will realize how hollow they are and how they do not fulfill your soul, and they're actually a cage you're building for yourself. It took me 14 years to realize I was building a cage for myself. And you believe that you will be regretful of doing that, then the question becomes, can you play the mental game in your head to get ahead of this and not fall trapped to it? Can I get ahead of these regrets so that way I will not fall trapped to it? And let me tell you, it's one of the most uncomfortable and scary things you can do. Because everything within me, everything within you says, I need these things. And you have to keep reminding yourself, wait, no, Mark, you don't want to die with regrets. Well, but what if I run out of money? It's okay, Mark. Money's not a really important thing. Well, but my family's counting on me. It's okay. You have a lot of things. You have friends. You have network. You have experience. You have all these intangibles that no one can take from you. Yeah, but what if it's not enough? It's this constant thing, at least in my head. And so I think that it would be healthy for everyone listening to learn these lessons. But either you have to make the mistakes to learn them, or you have to get really comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think it is a constant thing in most people's heads. The difference is most people listen to the first voice and go, yeah, you're right, let me just keep doing what I'm doing. Where people that I consider, use the term high achievers, they continue to push for what they want. And when that shift happens in your life, when you realize it's not what you thought it was, and then your new goal is to find out what it really is, it's the same thing. It's the same methodology to figure out what it is, I imagine. Now, for you, you had mentioned that your passion now is these conversations, the conversations where you get to sit down with people and have them on your show, and to be on stage and MC events. And then you do a lot of that and all that stuff. So how did you figure that shift out? I think sometimes people are afraid to jump because they don't know what that passion is.
Yeah, it was, listening to others. Honestly, I didn't believe myself. So, there was a moment last winter or something where I realized, it hit me. I was like, you know what? When I used to listen to talk radio, I used to sit in my car and go, oh, I could host this radio show. And then I thought that was ego. And I ran a creative agency. So I'd be working with actors, and I'd be working with talent, and be working with really, important people, and they're on camera, and my team's behind the camera. And I would say, just let me show you how you should read this off the prompter. And then I would show them. Or, I would be like, I'd offer for my clients to be like the host for them. Or I'd be sitting off camera as a more like a producer role, interviewing people and asking them questions. And I knew I was really good at all this stuff. But a voice in the back of my head, or my team, honestly, some people on my team were like, that's just Mark wanting to be in the spotlight. But it hit me where I started to think through all of these things. And I go, oh, what is that? There must be something to this. I realized that when I listen to podcasts, I love podcasts. When I listen to podcasts where they were like magazine publishers and media people speaking about an industry that I wasn't a part of. I used to love a podcast called How Sound. I think it's called How Sound, but it was put on where they would talk about how NPR would put together radio documentaries for storytelling that had nothing to do with my career, but I loved it. I listened to this great podcast about how interviewers interview people. That was like 4 years ago. What does that have to do with anything? So there's a certain point, though, where it's like, it's too hard to ignore. Yeah. But on top of that, when I started leaning into it a lot more, you've been podcasting for a very long time. The podcast I host now, We Do Hard Things, this is my third podcast. So the first podcast I started, maybe in, 2014, 2013, I just did it because I wanted to do it. And so at a certain point, you kind of can't ignore it. People keep telling you that you're pretty good at it. And finally, I just went, could this be a thing? Because that was really what was holding me up. It just didn't feel like I owned a multi-million-dollar agency with 24 staff, and we did really cool things, and people understood that. And for me to say, I'm not going to do that thing that fits into a really nice box. When I'm at the airport traveling and going across customs and they say, what do you do? I could say I'm a business owner. Oh, what do you do? I own a marketing agency. It makes sense, right? Like, like people understand that. For me to say, I'm a professional host. Now, that might be a more interesting conversation at a cocktail party, and it certainly is. But it's really hard for me still to be like, that is who I am and what I do. I know I love it, and I know it feeds my soul, and I'm super curious and all of those things, but it just doesn't feel like a thing. Like for me to explain this to my grandfather, he's going to be like, wait, that's a job? You face this, you know what I mean, right?
So when grandpa's like, go get a job, buddy, just go get a job. And it's funny that you say that, because I've been podcasting for 5.5 years. I've been doing it full time for almost 4 years now. And still to this day, when people are like, what do you do? I still feel a little weird going, I'm a podcaster, because then there's a whole explanation behind it that I feel like at some point it's legitimized enough that you shouldn't have to have a full conversation past there. Like if I was like, oh, I'm a radio disc jockey, they'd be like, oh, cool. Right. And so it's just an interesting thing. So I tend to say something like, podcaster and I own a business, and then it becomes like this convoluted. Right.
But now we're like hedging and stuff. So you mentioned it, like if you're like, oh, I'm a DJ at a radio station, or I'm a reporter, or I'm a journalist, or I'm a segment producer for 60 Minutes. Like all of those things do the very same thing that you and I do, but they're very legitimate because you're going off and doing it for someone else. When you're doing it for yourself, it somehow feels less legitimate, but it's not.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not at all. So we just need to, you and I need to make a promise, a pact to get over this.
Well, it's funny because I started to say that because I have this story of, it was my girlfriend's 40th birthday a couple years ago. And I had met a family friend, and they're like, oh, Justin, you're the boyfriend. I'm like, yeah, I'm the boyfriend. I was kind of new at the time. And I was like, I'm the boyfriend. He's like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a podcaster. And he literally paused and he looked at me. He goes, no, what do you really do? Like, how do you actually make money? And I was just like, I was like podcasting, and I was like, I'm done. In my head, I was like, I'm done with this conversation. So at the same time that I also go, oh, I don't know. And I hem and haw around that whole idea. If somebody questions it, I get mad. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? So I kind of play both cards on that when it comes to that. I imagine you deal with the same thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, ultimately I struggle to talk about myself. I mean, that's ultimately why I actually like interviewing people.
That's why we're good hosts, right?
Well, I don't need to be in the spotlight, but I only learn through asking questions and watching people. I can learn by reading, and I can't go through a course. I mean, there's no way I have the attention span to go through someone teaching me something. But I had an electrician replace the electrical panel in my house. And I said, can I watch you? He said, what do you mean? I said, can I watch you for the day? Because I'm very, very handy. I'm a very handy person. I do like major renovations. If we need to do we renovated our backyard. I had, like excavators and bobcats and stuff brought in, and I'm very handy. But so I'm like, can I watch you? And I just watched him politely, tried not to bug him, asked him a few questions. Never had to hire an electrician again.
That's awesome.
I just why do you do that? And why do you do that? And so that's the nature of it. But mostly it's also because I don't really, I'm not very good at speaking about myself. I feel like I'm mumbling right now as we do this. I'd much rather ask you questions and put you on the spot.
It's funny. First interview I ever did, obviously this is years ago, when I was being interviewed, not the one where I was interviewing, I ended up asking all the questions because I was very, very uncomfortable talking about myself. And you get, obviously, and at this point, like you've done this enough times that you get used to it. It doesn't mean you're 100% comfortable. No, but you still do it because you understand the importance of it. And you might say something that changes somebody's life when they're listening to this podcast. So you show up. Oh, yeah. And it really does become almost like a muscle that you have to work over and over and over again. I got interviewed for the first time in a couple of weeks just yesterday, and I felt stale. I usually get interviewed once or twice a week, and I felt super stale because it had been holidays and stuff like that. And I don't do anything. I don't do much over the holidays. And I was just like super stale. It was like an awkward interview. So you have to work that muscle. Now, as a host for you, obviously it was something you were good at from the beginning, but as you do it more and more, do you see yourself getting better? And what are some of the things you do to kind of keep yourself in check to make sure you're improving over and over again?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yes, I do. I do notice that I get better and better. But one thing that happened for me was last February, I jumped on Clubhouse. Now, by August, it kind of fizzled, in my opinion. I apologize if anyone's a hardcore Clubhouse person, but I got on Clubhouse and I made the decision to host rooms 5 days a week.
Wow.
So I was going to host a 1 to 2 hour room 5 days a week. And let me tell you, reps. And when you're interviewing people that you love and are interested in, it feels like magic. And when you're kind of like holding that smile, right? Like that, like, yeah, and you're encouraging them because you're kind of not interested or you're bored or you're not sure what they're talking about or what have you, but you show up and you do it anyway, that makes you a lot better.
Yeah.
The other thing that I naturally do, and again, I didn't even realize I do this, is I listen to interviews not for the content, but I listen to the interviewer. And so one of my role models, let's say, one of the people that I look up to, Zane Lowe. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Zane Lowe from Apple Music.
We talked about him.
Yeah, he's a Kiwi who he's from New Zealand. He's a musician. He went to England. He was a morning DJ on BBC Radio, but he's all about vibe, right? And so he talks about art and music in such a way that's about energy and about creativity. And so when Apple launched its music, all of its music stuff, they hired him. They brought him over. And so I listened to him, interview Adele. And I go, oh, why did he share? Oh, he shared a story, but he did it in 2 sentences and he kept it really tight to the point. They're video interviews. So I'm like, oh, he's looking down. He's looking down to the left. And it looks like he's scratching his forehead. But I think there might be a preview monitor and I think a producer might be feeding him questions. And I'm watching these things because, to be honest with you, again, this doesn't feel like work. This feels like me trying to crack a code to get really good at this. And so that's what I'm constantly doing. But it comes down to reps. It comes down to practice. You can't get rusty, as you said. You just need to keep doing it over and over and over again. And then the biggest thing, watch yourself back. I mean, every sports person watches game footage of others, but they watch their own because when you're living it live, it feels like magic. And then you watch it back and you're like, oh, it wasn't that good. Or it feels terrible and you watch it back and you go, oh, it wasn't that bad, because our emotions. Yeah.
I want to talk about some hosts in a second here, but how many times have you done an interview and you were done and you're like, that wasn't very good. Like the content wasn't good. The guest was kind of boring. And then you release it and your audience is like, this is the best episode ever. This happens to me all the time. Whenever I think that it's a stale episode, whatever I release and my audience is like, yeah, like what, get more excited about the ones I'm excited about, but it's just not the case. It's crazy.
Well, let me tell you a story. So when we were doing Clubhouse, I managed to break through and get big pretty quick, build a following. I got connected with Les Brown's team, and we started doing rooms with Les Brown, which was great because then in August I was able to go to an event in Queens, New York, and work with Les Brown and everyone around. Now, here's the thing: I didn't grow up with Les Brown. I didn't know of Les Brown until my friend Evan Carmichael kind of introduced me to him, and so everyone's like, "Dude, you're working with Les Brown." And I'm like, okay. I mean, yeah, he's a very gifted speaker. He's a very kind man, and he's a really good guy. But I'm not starstruck because I just didn't grow up in that world. But we're on stage. I have, 700 or 800 people in the room, and we're throwing questions to people. And one of the guys I threw a question to, I knew because I was vetting these people, and he started crying, like not gentle crying. Weeping.
Wow.
Choked up, couldn't get the words out. And I back channel my team and I literally go like, this guy is crying on my stage. What? Like, I'm a host, right? So I'm like, we got to move this along. Like, this is uncomfortable. Like he's blubbering. He's not making any sense. Anyway, it ends and people go bananas for how sincere and transparent. And I was just like, oh, I really either missed the mark or like, I don't know. Something was off because in the moment I was just like, this is, I grew up in television. When I finished film school, I went and worked in television, and there was this line that everyone said that it was stuck with me. At the end of an episode, they'd go, that was good TV. And it's this idea, like when I finish an interview, I can go like, that's good podcasting, right? It's this idea of not a good episode, but you've just fit the mold for what you want to create.
Yeah.
So I have this feeling in like when we're hosting live events and stuff where I can go like, that's a good live moment, but I must have missed the mark. So yeah, I guess it sometimes happens.
I think sometimes when you're the person hosting, and I've done my own live events, when you expect it, in your mind, you think it's going to go a certain way. Right. And then all of a sudden something goes awry or something goes the way you didn't think it was supposed to. And you're like, this is the end of the world. Like when I hosted my event in 2019, my last live event in 2019, Fabio Viviani was one of the speakers and his microphone cut out halfway through. I was losing my mind. Get him on mic. What's going on? What's happening? And afterwards I talked to people and they're like, I didn't even know his mic went out until they handed him a new one.
Yeah.
So when you pay attention to those things, when you know there's all these things that are supposed to go wrong, it's absolutely crazy. But I want to backtrack really quick as two hosts that, when you interviewed me, I was like, you're a very good host. And it was a genuine compliment. And, I feel like I'm a pretty good host as well. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about, you mentioned you like studying hosts. And I do the same thing, by the way. I love Rogan for his ability to have a conversation that is against the individual he's talking to, but it sounds like they're friends, right? Even though he doesn't really know these people and he can tell them they're wrong to their face. And there's this magic to the way he says it. It's an art form. I mean, it's something that he's mastered. And he talks about how he's learned it in jiu-jitsu and all these things, how he doesn't get mad because of jiu-jitsu. And then I look at people on television, like late night talk shows. I'm like, this is the worst canned, pre-recorded, whatever nonsense I've ever seen in my life. And, there's so many different art forms. So who are some of the people you look to beyond Zane and you admire for specific little things? And what have you taken and kind of instilled into your practice?
Oh, great question. Okay. So I don't even remember the man's name, but inside the actor studio.
Oh yeah. James Lipton.
James Lipton. I realized again, just when I was reflecting on, could I be a host? I was like, why was it in 2000, 2001, 2003? Why did I watch every single episode? And now that's a very formal, very structured type of approach, but he has a style where he can go, Tom Hanks, and then the person goes like, yeah, and you're like, a marvelous man. Tell me about him. Right? And so it's like, so he can just drop this, let the moment sit, and without actually adding a leading question, he can say, tell me about that. And so that's something where it's like, okay, there's something to this pace. There's something to not asking a question, just asking the person to talk about something and then get out of the way.
Yeah.
So I really love that. Here's the thing. You're going to realize I'm really bad with names. So.
No, you're good, man. I am too, by the way. The fact that I pulled James Lipton out of my butt, I was like, after this interview, I got to go tell Lauren I remembered somebody's name.
I love that. The guy who, he runs a massive podcast network, Jesse, he's on the Judge John Hodgman podcast.
I don't know.
Jesse and Something Go. Anyway, he had a podcast called The Turnaround. So whoever the guy who created The Turnaround was, and he's a podcaster, but he built a huge network. He has an NPR show. And that was something where it's just like, again, it was a podcast where he interviewed interviewers and journalists to talk about those things. So I found that very, very interesting. A few things from NPR. So again, this isn't a host, but Planet Money. One of the best crafted types of stories you can have, because what they taught me is, and they break down how they do this. They decide that they're going to have a topic, but then they start with an individual to tell that story just to make the topic more human. So that way they can then come out. If they're going to talk about trade wars between the U.S. and China, they don't want to talk about trade wars. They go, this is Brad, and he's, a fishmonger in Boston, and he lives his day this way, and he does this, and he does this, and you hear some stuff about his life, and then they go, what people don't realize is a conversation that's taking place right now in Sweden is going to affect whether he can sell fish or not. So there's a really great way to craft stories that way. Yeah. And so I've listened to these things and honestly gotten comfortable playing with perspective, playing with timing, right? You don't have to tell a story in a linear fashion. You can tell it out of order. Playing with, in my podcast, something I've been doing for the last few months now is we do the interview, but then I editorialize. I actually later record myself talking about the interview we're having, not in real time because it's done at a later time, but I don't hide the fact it's done at a later time. Because I want to be able to just drop in and say, whoa, I know you're listening right now, but what you may not realize is, and I learned that from Guy Raz. Guy Raz, How I Built This, NPR, great, TED Radio Hour. he's done a bunch of stuff, but he uses that technique. And so I think the real lesson here is more than, whether you want to be a host or better at podcasting or whatever it might be. It's when you find the thing that you really love, you just can't help but immerse yourself in it. And if you are not immersed in what you do, that should tell you something.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. I love all those examples. And one thing I'll throw out there too, if you don't watch it, I used to hate this guy as a host, and now I love him. Sean Evans from Hot Ones, which is a YouTube show. Yeah. He used to annoy the shit out of me. I was like, what is this guy? Like, why is he getting to sit down with all these people, blah, blah. And you begin to watch. And I did some research on him, and I realized that he does all of his own research for every single guest. Now, First We Feast is a gigantic production company. They have all the staff in the world to be able to do that for him. And he 100% does it himself. And his guests can tell. And one thing that I learned from him is when you put in the time and effort to get to know your guest, the mutual respect that rises from that versus going in not knowing who you're talking to or not knowing what it is that you want to talk about is a completely different ballgame. And so it's an interesting, for me, at least over time, it was an interesting change of heart when it comes to this guy. Because at first I was like, this guy's trash.
I love that lesson though. So here's the thing. Every guest that I have on my podcast, I certainly buy their books because it's not that I love reading, but I buy their book because I need to have the book, because in my mind, they're giving me their time and they're coming on. So at the very least, I can hold up a copy. And so if you were watching this kind of like behind me, I'm kind of blocking it, but it's just stacks and stacks of books because I buy everything. But as long as time permits, and I say that because sometimes I've had a booking come like 4 days from now, and you just don't have time to get through a book. But as long as time permits, or they can give me an advanced copy, it's my duty. It's my job to read this book. It's also my duty and my job to learn as much as I can about them. Now, early on, this actually hurt me because I knew them so well, and they knew I knew them so well that we would cut straight to the chase, and there was no context. The audience didn't know what the hell was going on. Like, because I could go straight to like, hey, in 1978, this happened to you. We're like, let's talk about that. And they're like, oh, wow, okay. And then they love it, right? They're like engaged and they love it because I know it. But then part of why I now do this thing where I add context to my podcast is I realize I want to have that next level conversation. I don't want to have I don't want to have the same conversation they've had 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times. I don't want to ask them a question that they can pull a canned thing on. I want to get that out of the way so we can have the real conversation. And the only way to do that is if I know as much as I can about them, either how they think or what they've done. And it comes with some costs, right? I'm not surprised when they say something. Sometimes you don't have any context at all, but it still makes for a better connection. And I think as hosts, we owe that to the people we're asking their time of.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And people who aren't hosts that are listening to this, like if you take this approach into your relationships and the way you approach getting to know your friends, as they grow, because you may have met them 10, 15 years ago, but they're different people now. Like take this approach into their life now. This will better your relationships in general, just getting to know people at a deeper level. And guess what? In return, they're going to want to get to know you at a deeper level too. Now, all of a sudden, your relationships begin to grow to a whole new level. Now, Mark, I wanted to ask you something I ask every single person I have on the show. Obviously, I get to interview some of the most successful people in the world. And so my question for you is two parts.
Wait, was that a brag?
This was a brag on you because you're on my show as a guest. And it's a two-part question. The first one is, what's your definition of success? Second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Great questions. So my definition of success is being able to wake up and do whatever you want to do that day. And that only comes when you've set up and taken care of everything else. Or I suppose you're living a very mediocre life, I suppose. Like there's going to be 2 extremes to that. Either you have set up everything the way you need to, so that way you can wake up and go, what do I want to do today? And you're completely free. Or none of it matters. And then you're on the very bottom of the spectrum. What am I doing each day to be able to do that? To me, that only comes with team. So you can't do anything alone, which means you need people. This is my greatest weakness. I'm actually not great at managing people. I'm not good with people. I'm not good at systems. I'm not good at any of that stuff. And so I have been working, and I continue to work on that every single day, because you can't do anything alone. I mean, you can do something alone, but you're not going to go very far. So people, you need a certain amount of wealth to be able to make those decisions and live the way that you want to live. And so whether it's with my agency or even just laying the groundwork to be able to monetize the very things that I love to do, if that's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long it takes, it's always worth pursuing your passions, because the money will take care of itself. That's one of those truths that I hope it's true. And then the third thing, which I've only learned recently, I'm 38 years old. I only learned this in the last 2 or 3 years. Your health. I know that your principles come down to what business, relationship, spirituality
and wellness. Yeah.
And wellness. Well, to me, I use, rather than wellness, because I come from the corporate industry where wellness was hijacked by insurance companies, but I use health. And to me, health is your sleep. It's your body movement. It's how much you drink. So your hydration. It's what you eat. I don't even care how much you eat, but what you eat is really, really important. And then your mindset. And so those are things that I often forget how important they are. I'm like I'm much heavier than I was a few weeks ago. I was watching footage from November, and I was like, wow, I was much skinnier than I am now. Because I kind of just let myself go in December. I was like, I'm going to have fun. But this week, I'm getting back up at 4 a.m. and I'm going back to bed at 9 o'clock at night, and I'm drinking a gallon of water, and I've cut out anything, I'm back to like chicken, rice, and green peas for lunch, and just like good whole foods, because I live and I work better on whole foods. And all of those things. And suddenly, I'm doing my morning pages, and suddenly it's like, oh, yeah, I remember why I did all these things.
Yeah.
So it's like working at a standing desk, or going for a walk, or stretching, or just anything. But I would say that out of all of those things, the most important thing you should always focus on is your health. I know you mentioned on your birthday episode that you have to fill up your cup, right? Like that was one of the lessons you learned. But if you're not taking care of your health, there is literally, you will not bring a good attitude. You will not have a good mindset. Your hormones and emotions will be all over the place. You can't think straight. You can't get work done. You won't be productive. You won't have confidence. You won't feel good about yourself. Like everything comes down to what you're doing to take care of your mind and body.
Oh, it's true, man. And when you're in a routine, especially a physical one, no matter how difficult or how easy it is, just something outside, a little bit outside of your comfort zone, everything else becomes easier, right? Like the work that you have to do becomes easier. You walk into every room with a little bit more confidence. You hop on a potential sales call with more confidence. Everything becomes easier when you're holding yourself accountable to these things that are a little bit outside of your comfort zone. And so I love that you shared that, because it's so true. Especially it's easy to let yourself go. Like it's fun. It's a lot more fun, man. And I'm a perfect example of that. I lost a ton of weight in the beginning of 2021. And the last 3 months of the year, I was like, and I just let it all go. But now I'm back on 75 hard, even through COVID, by the way. I still did it.
All right.
I've still done it. So we're weeks or day 7 of 75 hard. And I feel better now with COVID than I did pre-COVID at the end of the year. So it shows you what moving your body can do.
Yeah. If I can just relay this to one thing, like a lot of people may not realize that addiction is everywhere, right? Like we're all addicted to something. Everybody is addicted to something. Everybody has a vice. It's there. But here's what I've learned quite recently about addiction. Whatever it is that you spend time or focus on, whatever that addiction is for you, whatever that thing is, it's because you're trying to pacify some other area of your life you're not happy with. And it's great. It's awesome. It's like the reason we do it is it's like the greatest feeling or distraction ever. But then it loses its joy, and then it loses its edge, and then it's no longer giving you whatever it is you thought it would get from it, and it no longer serves you. And then you start to question it, and then you start to feel bad about yourself, and then you start to feel guilty, and then before you know it, you're just like, I guess this is me. And for me, that's food, or like I've never had issues with it, but that's the thing. And until finally you're like, I guess this is me. And that is the same thing as what we're talking about, right? That cycle of like, it once served me and it no longer does. You got super fit and then you let things go, but you're going to hit a moment. Hopefully you recognize it, but you're going to hit a moment where you go like, oh, I guess this is me. Wait a minute. This isn't me. Yeah. I did lose all of that weight. I did have that great thing. I know what I'm doing. I can do it again. I just need to what? And that was like, that's me this week right now. Again, it's like, oh, I just need to get back to all of those things that worked. I have to start doing it. And guess what, man? I feel awesome about myself. If we did this a week ago, I did not feel awesome about myself. I felt slow and fat and lazy. And I was a fat guy, so I can say that. All of those things that I used to be, I thought I was back to being again. And it turns out I'm not. I just have to do the work. And if I do it, I'll feel great.
Dude, I love it. I love it. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, Mark, how do people get a hold of you? Where do they get all the good information? What's the good stuff?
Well, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Mark Drager. You can find me on YouTube if you want to watch the podcast or listen to the We Do Hard Things podcast. Or if you're interested in, branding services or creative agency, you can check us out, phantommedia.com. Awesome,
Mark. Like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, and that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
It's every time that I've realized that I'm not as good as I thought I was. And so again, just like the earlier question, I can't give you that one aha moment, because what I've gotten very good at is having that moment like once a week. I thought I was really good at this. I'm not. That used to take me a long time to get over, this crushing sense of like, I'm not as good as I thought I was. And now I've got that down to like a 2-hour window because of the power of reframing. But more than anything, it's just like, okay, there's an opportunity. There's a lesson I can learn. Reframing is the most practical and important thing you can do in your life, right? It's just switching from what you thought was happening to what you realize it could be. It just comes down to that mindset.
Awesome. Mark, I want to honor you for living your dream, right? Instead of continuing down the path of what was easy, you decided to pivot and go full into your dreams, no matter what the world was saying, no matter how many questions you might get at the cocktail party or at a business meeting. You leaned into it, man. So thank you so much for doing that. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing with my audience. I know you'll be on again in the future because I've loved this conversation, man. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. And as you said, you interview some of the most successful people. So I guess that's why I'm here.
There you go, man. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Growth Now movement. This is how you can really help me out. If you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. And let's grow this movement to epic heights. And it's all going to be because of you guys. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.